So there's many controversies in professional wrestling, and certainly one of the styles of professional wrestling that gets a bit of flack sometimes is personally one of my favorite styles of wrestling, and that's deathmatch wrestling. So deathmatch wrestling does get a lot of heat, so it does, for it is style. Now, obviously, the majority of people, maybe in the mainstream of professional wrestling, won't agree with deathmatch wrestling. And I have my own particular views on deathmatch wrestling as well, what it should be really, and how it should be represented. Now, obviously, there's a lot of companies out there that do represent, I think, deathmatch wrestling in a very good way. And companies like GCW, you've got ICW's No Hold Bar from America, not to confuse the ICW in Glasgow. You've got British companies like TNT Extreme, Rise England as well, who have recently just put on a collab with ICW's No Hold Bar. I'm sure I'm going to have to get around and talk about that at some point. You've also got old companies like CCW as well from America. And even in Japan, where I think some of the best deathmatch wrestling happens, is Freedom Japan and Big Japan Wrestling as well, which have had a number of classics as well. For me personally, deathmatch wrestling, for me, a deathmatch wrestling should be a wrestling match, but with weapons, and a lot of good weapons in that too. I do get disgruntled when I watch a deathmatch, and if it's just two guys hitting each other with the head with shit, it's not really. That's the flack professional wrestling gets, though, sometimes, and I can kind of agree with that as well. I would rather watch two wrestlers who knew how to wrestle and use the weapons in clever ways. People like Shun Kasai, Takeda, Alex Colon, John Wayne Murdoch. These guys know how. You could put these guys in a wrestling ring for a normal wrestling match and they would put on a banger. But they would just rather do it with weapons, mainly glass tubes. You've got gusset plates, you've got obviously the classic thumbtacks as well, and the way they use these weapons, that's the most important thing for me, and not just hitting each other with the head. Another thing that gets me in professional deathmatch wrestling as well is it's meant to be bloody, it's meant to be gory, it's also been called a live horror show when you go to these. Sometimes, though, I feel like it goes a bit too far with some of the grotesque things these guys do. And sometimes, though, it doesn't even make logic in the match. However, though, as I say, there's plenty of good wrestling out there, and there's plenty of good deathmatch tournaments out there. And I love it. I personally love to watch and show the best side of deathmatch wrestling. Such great, tournaments as the classic GCW's NGI, the Nick Gage Invitational, which I watch every year. And this one, I'm going to do a video on the NGI 7 this year, because that was a fantastic tournament in Chicago. You've also got classic tournaments from CCW, like the Tournament of Death, which has been going on for so long now. You've even had guys like John Moxley involved in that stuff, Nick Gage as well. He almost died famously at one of the Tournament of Deaths for CCW. GCW also have their own Tournament of Survival as well, which the last one was won by the very, very, very good Welshman, Mr. Drew Parker, in a very good match against Matt Tremont. That was a clever. I really enjoyed that match, and those matches told a fantastic story. Also here in the UK, and I'm going to this year's one, we have TNT's Dead or Alive 4, which is happening only in just a couple of weeks in Liverpool. On the lineup of that, I cannot wait to experience my first deathmatch tournament. There's one more thing I also like to talk to you about deathmatch wrestling. It's kind of a personal view of my own, is that you should really be careful what deathmatch wrestling matches you should watch, because obviously the first ones that you watch will sort of give you the idea of what the rest are like. And there's a particular view on deathmatch wrestling from one person that I kind of agree with, not completely agree with, but it's a bit of a surprise. I was listening to a podcast, Jim Cornette Experience, and I think he briefly talked about deathmatch wrestling. He'll hate all deathmatch wrestling. Okay, we all know that. The point he was making, though, is these guys that will go in front of crowds in crummy back gardens, about 10 people, barely 10 people, and they do these spots where they could really, really hurt themselves, like really do damage. And these matches, not very good when you've got two amateurs basically just, again, as I said before, hitting each other over the heads with things. And to be honest with you, it's just not worth it for me. If you're a deathmatch wrestler and you're going to go do this style, obviously you have to start from the bottom, but there's no point in really messing yourself up for 10 people in a crowd and a very low paycheck. I just can't agree with that, and I would rather see deathmatch wrestlers save that sort of stuff, or even better stuff, for a bigger crowd and a bigger paycheck. But apart from that, yeah, he hates all deathmatch wrestling. I don't hate all deathmatch wrestling, but I certainly wouldn't want to go. You know, I've seen clips recently from Russia, and I'm just not completely sold on the thing. So I am. So I would rather go to watch professional wrestlers who know how to, how to tell story in the ring. And trust me, some of the best storytellers in professional wrestling are deathmatch wrestlers. Definitely, they can tell a very good story in the ring. Fantastic stuff. So, but yes, watch out for those matches. That's the one and I would give. Some people love that stuff. They just want to see two guys, not really wrestle, but just have a really violent fight almost, eh? So, I prefer seeing, there's certain moves that I enjoy watching in certain spots. I think some wrestlers are very clever at how they use their weapons. I think people like Big F and Judge or Wayne Murdoch, these guys know how to use their weapons. I also want to make the point that there's definitely a difference between deathmatch wrestling and hardcore wrestling. Hardcore wrestling is mainly table spots. I feel they'll use a little bit of barbed wire. A lot of chair shots obviously happen in hardcore matches. For me, a deathmatch though, that's when glass gets involved. Paint glass, light tube, bundles. They build these amazing things out of light tubes to people smash through these amazing setups. So that when the blood flows from that's when deathmatch becomes truly a deathmatch. And there's certain spots that people will do. If you've not watched deathmatch wrestling before, I know a lot of deathmatch fans are not particularly a fan of this one, but I feel like it's a nice little introduction for anybody who hasn't watched it. You go watch Nick Gage's match on AEW with Chris Jericho. That's a nice little introduction, I feel, for deathmatch wrestling. That match in particular, I must admit, was surprised because when they announced Nick Gage for AEW, well, I was quite happy, but I always thought back in my head because it's on national TV. How far are they going to let Nick Gage go with this? During the match, I understood exactly how far they were going to let him go when he started bringing out the light tube. When the light tubes came out, I was very excited indeed because I didn't think I always thought, well, they'll definitely have the pizza cutter spot. They'll probably have barbed wire. There'll be chair shots. There'll be tables. I just didn't know they were going to involve light tubes, and well, they did. By the end of this match, credit was credit due. Chris Jericho was a mess at the end of this match. Just go look at the state of this, and fair enough, a man of his quality and his age as well, he doesn't need to do this. He doesn't need to go and have a death match, for goodness sake. It's Chris Jericho. He's proved himself. Like, he's not as a deathmatch star, but as a professional wrestler. But I would definitely go out and watch that match. That's a lovely introduction, I feel, because it does show some main aspects of what deathmatch wrestling. If you can get past the blood and the glass, you should definitely check out the genre itself. One of the spots I enjoyed about that match as well was definitely when Chris Jericho off the top rope did I want to say, is it Hurricanrana or Poison Rana? I think it's a Hurricanrana. Yes, Hurricanrana off the top rope, going through the glass with Nick Gage going through the glass was just fantastic, actually. And the glass was flying everywhere in this match. And even Chris Jericho, credit to him, because I don't know how often he's ever used a light tube, but he was quite good at cracking them over Nick Gage's head as well. So if you're thinking about maybe trying to watch a death match, that's a nice little introduction, definitely, for sure. Also, if you find the American, the Western culture style of deathmatch wrestling maybe not your cup of tea, I would definitely go and watch maybe what they're doing in Japan. Last year in Japan, there was a fantastic deathmatch between Jun Kasai and El Desperado, which, from the Wrestling Observer, got the highest star rating for a deathmatch possibly ever. The star rating itself was a 4.75. I watched this match. It was something else. The set in itself alone, fully lit arena. Usually when you go to death matches, they're in smaller arenas, very dark, very kind of dingy in a way, which shows the aspect of deathmatch wrestling. But here in Japan, it was a New Japan show, pay-per-view show, and they decided to do Jun Kasai and El Desperado. Now, there was no really glass tubes in this one, but man, Jun Kasai loves a knife board. Also, with both guys wearing white as well, they really showed the aspect of blood in this match, and it really got quite bloody, especially with El Desperado. His mask pretty much being, well, it was the first time I saw El Desperado's face, because his mask pretty much got completely torn off. During the match, he is trying to keep part of it covered. He just realizes it's not going to happen. He just has to wrestle it, and everyone's just going to see his face. But there was a lot of blood, and there's a lot of blood on both these gentlemen's faces. This was a great story, because these two have had a past rivalry as well in previous companies. So it was nice for them to come, and Shin Kasai did a fantastic promo at the end of this match. It was very tearful. If I could translate it, I would. But I've seen some of the translation. It was fantastic. So that's another one definitely to go and watch. So overall, yes, I'm a fan of deathmatch wrestling, but only certain forms. I will not just watch any old deathmatch wrestling. I said for the next couple of, for the next time on this channel, I will be covering another deathmatch, and hopefully guiding you to what good matches to watch, and hopefully making more deathmatch wrestling sort of acceptable, and also hopefully getting you guys interested as well. So hopefully when you come back again, I'll have more on Dead or Alive and TNT, and there's definitely more deathmatch tournaments coming up and other pay-per-views, and we'll be back definitely reporting on those. Don't you worry.